Hello and welcome to a special report by Euronews. We're coming to you live from Evian, where the G7 is now underway. I'm Maria Tadeo. As I say, the leaders of France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Canada, the United Kingdom, and the United States are meeting in this town for the next 3 days. On the agenda, on the menu, geopolitics, global economic imbalances. That has become a code word for China and its massive trade surplus with the world, and technology with a focus on artificial intelligence. Now, as I mentioned, the leaders have now made their way to Evian. Hopefully we can bring you up those pictures. The President of the United States is now here at this meeting, and on his way in, he repeated and reiterated the framework to a deal with Iran, a framework to a deal that will end the war, will now lead to the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz by Friday. He says this is going to see oil prices plunge across the world and stock markets boom. A lot of the details, however, still major questions around the nuclear program when it comes to Tehran. The President of the United States also saying that with the war in Iran now wrapped and done, his focus will now turn to Ukraine and the war with Russia. That is it for the G7. When it comes to the Europeans, their focus is also on the Strait of Hormuz, reopening a vital strait for the global energy market. We heard from both the French president and the head of the European Commission. The focus now is to reopen the strait with no payments. Let's take a look.
Et nous avons aussi notre porte-avions.
France stands ready to deploy the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle. It can be deployed a few days after the deal is confirmed.
Déployé dans les 2-3 jours qui suivront la confirmation. Donc là,
we will do everything in our power to ensure that no tolls are imposed. It would breach international law. The priority is to reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
Déjà la priorité, c'est le rouvrir.
The Straits of Hormuz must reopen, and freedom of navigation must be restored, toll-free. This is essential for the regional stability and, of course, also for the global economy.
And that was the head of the European Commission and the French president, the host to this G7, a major focus on Iran when the Europeans repeating they want to see the Strait of Hormuz reopen. And we are expecting a peace deal ceremony, according to the U.S. president, that will take place in Switzerland on Friday. That is, of course, for Iran. But let's go now to our reporter, Angela Sujans, who has been following up every move in this G7. Angela, we see that the leaders, if I'm not mistaken, I look at the time now, they are supposed to be heading into a dinner. The 7 of them are here. What are we expecting will come out of that dinner, and who's at that dinner?
Yes, so the dinner is titled Working Together to Address Major International Challenges. A bit jargonistic, but a catch-all phrase nonetheless, expected to touch upon all of the major themes here at this G7 summit in Evian. This spans, of course, that news that came in late overnight that a potential end to the war in Iran could be brokered as early as Friday, as well as Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine. But what is particularly interesting about this dinner is that it comes hot on the heels of that meeting between Trump and Macron, arguably the men of the hour, where they expressed platitudes and an update regarding that potential Iran ceasefire agreement. But what will be interesting and one to watch is whether divisions will emerge over this supper. We know that Trump threatened 100% tariffs on French wines as well as champagne earlier this morning in retaliation for a tax spearheaded by Paris on digital services. We also know that Trump has been particularly unhappy regarding his NATO allies' position on the war in Iran. But EU officials particularly were very keen to reiterate that unity is a driving force here at the G7 rather than divisions. Macron is also on a bit of a charm offensive when it comes to Trump. He will be chauffeuring the Republican leader to the Palace of Versailles on Wednesday for a dinner to celebrate the 250th anniversary, the birthday of the United States. So questions loom large here whether divisions or unity will come out of the G7.
And Angela, we did see that moment with the two men sitting down. They talked about the World Cup. It was a moment of friendship to some extent. The president of the U.S. saying that he was very honored to be in France, and that is exactly what French diplomats are hoping to get. No major diplomatic incidents here at this G7, but beyond, obviously, the niceties they have to do before the cameras, what are the Europeans really hoping to get out of President Trump from this meeting, if anything?
So I think what they're hoping for is a little bit more detail regarding the framework agreement. Trump has been pretty clear, stating that the oil will start flowing as early as Friday, but to whom and at what cost? Germany, Italy, the UK and France reiterated their support for this announcement earlier this morning, but they want the pedal to be put to the metal, as some could say, so that the agreement enters into force. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen here at the G7 as a bystander reiterated this, however, stated that a conversation between Washington and Tehran needs to occur to simmer tensions down in the Middle East and also open up that vital energy corridor, the Strait of Hormuz, so that the energy can continue to flow, the oil, I should say, continue to flow. She was peppered with questions from reporters at a press conference today asking whether the EU was mulling the drop of sanctions against Iran. She said yes, if the conditions were right. Let's take a listen.
We have a framework of sanctions that is responding to two main features. The one is the violation of human rights, and the other one is mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction. And the principle of sanctions is that we need real change on the ground before we can think about lifting them.
And that was the head of the commission. And this is now a critical question. What is going to happen with the sanctions regime on Iran? And what happens if the U.S. does decide to lift some of those sanctions? Will the Europeans have to follow suit? To debrief, let's cross over now to the United States, because we are joined by John Bolton. He is the former national security advisor to President Trump. Sir, there's a lot of questions still about the details of this framework. The president of the U.S. says that they will be revealed in the next 24 to 48 hours. But based on what you see, is this a good deal for the United States, and is this a good deal for the rest of the world?
No, I think it's a very bad deal for the United States. Trump isn't thinking about the geostrategic implications of the deal. He's thinking of one thing. He wants the Strait opened. He wants Gulf oil on international markets. He wants the price of gasoline at the pump down. That's all he cares about.
So at this point, if we understand, you're saying that he's put the U.S. national security at risk in exchange for cheap oil.
Well, I think that's basically what it comes down to. You know, Trump says he's digitally signed the agreement. The Prime Minister of Pakistan says they're going to sign it on Friday after 4 more days of technical talks. We don't know what's in this deal. If it were a great deal, it would be out in public. And I think that tells you pretty much what you need to know.
Let me pick up on that point, because we have not seen the details. He's talking now about a window of 24 to 48 hours. The fact that we don't know the details, what does that say to you? Is this a situation that is still fluid?
Well, I think it's embarrassing to the president. I think there's going to be some indication of unfreezing of Iranian assets, which he roundly criticized Barack Obama for back in 2016, and which I think is a mistake. I think it's a mistake to give this brutal theocracy any of the assets. I'm happy to give the assets back to Iran when it's under a free government. That's not where we are now.
But he did say there has been a change of leadership, and he did say they will never get the nuclear weapon, and they have agreed to that. So you don't buy that?
The change of leadership is only because we've killed the top 400 or 500 people in the existing regime, and you're down now to their seconds and deputies. So, yeah, it's different people, but it's the same fanatic regime. And I think that the idea that the deal is worthwhile because Iran has committed not to get nuclear weapons is a fantasy. Iran has been committed to not getting nuclear weapons for 56 years now, since it joined the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1970. Now, that was under the Shah, but even after the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the government has repeatedly said they won't seek nuclear weapons, including in the 2015 nuclear deal. They just don't mean it.
But I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you say that this is not a good deal, that he's done this to get oil prices down, that he cannot guarantee there is no nuclear weapon when it comes to the regime, and you also say nothing has changed when it comes to the leadership, then therefore you could possibly argue the world today is far more dangerous.
Well, I don't think it's far more dangerous immediately because I do think the U.S.-Israeli attacks caused considerable casualties among Iran's top leadership. I think we've done enormous damage to their military-industrial complex, more damage to the nuclear program, damage to the Navy, damage to the Air Force. It's going to take them a long time to recover from those attacks.
And I want to ask you two final questions, one about the Europeans and then another one going back to Iran. At this point, if they do not comply with the terms, and we still don't know what those terms are, does the U.S. have any leverage in terms of the military might? Because it seems to me President Trump will want to avoid at all costs another attack before the midterm elections.
Well, that's exactly right, and the Iranians can see that. They've seen for weeks, if not months, Trump is desperate for a deal. He's desperate for a deal, and they have maneuvered him. They've played him like a violin. That's why they've got the deal that they want.
So Iran got the better hand of the deal. That's what you would argue.
Yes, because they could see how palpably Trump wanted out of this, which means I don't think he's going to use military force again, and that takes the biggest weapon we have, the biggest leverage we have over Iran. That's all they will understand.
And just very briefly, the Europeans today, President Macron saying he can't put forward a mission to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump was very unhappy that they did not do that immediately. Is this going to fix the relationship in the context of NATO?
No, I think this European force is a fantasy. Is it willing to use force to keep the strait open, or is it going to be like a UN peacekeeping force that just waves as the ceasefire is violated? Nobody's ever addressed that question.
Well, John Bolton, thank you so much for joining us on this important topic and a very important day here at Euronews. We thank you for your time. And of course, the question is now, what will the Europeans do? The French president is saying that they want to play a part in the Strait of Hormuz. And there's also a bigger question here, which is, can President Emmanuel Macron maintain the unity of the G7 in a world in turmoil? Let's debrief now with Alberto Alemano, who is a professor of EU law at HEC University in Paris and also a Harvard fellow. Alberto, we've heard a lot from the president of the U.S., but when it comes to the Europeans, what does a good G7 summit look like for the EU?
Well, I think Evian matters not because the G7 will be able to fix the world itself, but because it remains the last venue where Europe and America can still sit at the same table and talk one another. But of course, this is a big test. It's a G7 plus. France decided to invite Brazil, Egypt, India, Kenya, and South Korea because they realized that G7 is no longer capable to simply, talk by themselves and providing solutions. So the European perspective, I think, is to be able to co-create an agenda that is going to be not antagonistic to America, but it's going to be an alternative one. And I think this is the difficult game. And what is going to be good for Europe, I think, is to potentially address the major global imbalances that have been weaponized against Europe and to provide some initial answers that are somehow independent from the will of President Trump.
And when you talk about imbalances, what do you refer to? Is that China? Because that is still an area in which the Europeans say we must work with the United States. This is really a common problem.
Definitely. I think China is the litmus test for this G7. Europe is trying to change tack and to basically free itself from America and to establish a very different relationship that several national leaders have tried to test in the past few weeks and months, and that's where America might not be happy about it. So definitely this is the area where the global imbalance has to be tackled in a different way. Europe can no longer follow in a blind way American priorities, and that's really where some potential further transatlantic tensions might arise in the next few hours.
And you talked about the other countries invited, because this is not just the G7. President Emmanuel Macron has reached out to Brazil, Kenya, South Korea, the Arab world. They will be represented in this summit. Is that a way of saying the G7 no longer works, so we need to bring the middle powers around the world?
Well, the G7 is clearly not dead, but he has to change. He has changed job. He has changed mission. He's no longer there to govern the world. The G7 are not able to govern the world. And basically the West, above all Europe, is trying to keep the idea of international cooperation alive. Multilateralism is questioned, but G7 is possibly the only forum, the only session where you are able to bring all these countries together and to project an alternative way of governance. And that's where Europe, I think, is expected by many other countries, in particular in the global South, to actually lead the way, because it's not going to be Japan, it's not going to be America alone. It's only Europe who could actually provide this alternative multilateral framework that is somehow alive, that is capable to provide a sort of format where issues like AI or mineral earth can be discussed in a way which goes beyond the bilateral relationship that the current administration in America tends to privilege.
And of course, there will be talks around the AI, but I want to just ask you as a final question. In that dinner, you would have the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, French President Emmanuel Macron, who's gone out of his way to really please and appease, to some extent, the President of the U.S. with that dinner in Versailles, the German Chancellor. Is there a Trump whisperer, or should we just simply retire that concept? There is no Trump whisperer.
I don't think we need the Trump whisper now. We need several European leaders able to speak with one voice and project some unity and the ability to basically show that Europe can gain some sovereignty in the way in which it deals with so many issues at the multilateral level, on trade issues, but also on defense, on issues as delicate as the Iran deal that is currently discussed and in relation to which we still lack many details. So I think that's the expectations, to see more than one leaders leading the way, and hopefully both Meloni and Macron will be able to play such a role, together with many others. That they need to synchronize a bit more, a bit better, and to not play this kind of unilateral games they've been playing in the past few weeks and months with the Trump administration.
And we're going to see that in action for the next 3 days. Alberto Lemano, thank you so much for joining us on Euronews. Now, as I say, this summit is now clearly underway. A working dinner will take place in a few minutes. The G7 leaders gathering around a working dinner. But I want to go back to Angela, because the one country we have not mentioned yet, and it is a crucial one, is Ukraine. Now, tomorrow, the Ukrainian president will be here in Evian. Angela, what kind of discussions are we expecting, and will there be a bilateral meeting between the president of the U.S. and the president of Ukraine?
Yes, Maria. So this has been an extremely interesting development over the last hour here at the G7 summit. Officially, according to the agenda, there was no bilateral scheduled between Zelensky and Trump, but this could change. We just heard Trump at that press conference with Macron state that now a potential end to the war in Iran has been found. He can shift his attention back to Kyiv. We know that the leaders will attend a dinner tomorrow night titled Building Peace and Security for Ukraine and Europe. We're hoping for some kind of outcome regarding these two leaders meeting, as many were interpreting Kyiv not being able to hold an audience with Trump at the G7 as it losing its position in the eyes of Donald Trump. Now, whatever happens with Washington, Europe is very keen to reiterate its ongoing support for Ukraine as the country weathers another year of Russian aggression. The conversation is expected to centre on how temporary support can transition to full-blown security guarantees. So when and if a ceasefire is negotiated, it can be extended and the conflict won't potentially bleed out into Europe. News did break today, however, that the Ukrainian president, not the Ukrainian president, an invitation was extended to the Russian president Putin to attend this G7. Interesting to point out that Russia was previously a member of the group of 7 industrialized nations before being kicked out after the 2014 illegal annexation of Crimea. Putin, of course, did not accept this invitation. However, a lot can happen within 24 hours, Maria, as we've seen. We'll have to wait and see what comes out of the talks on Tuesday.
And yes, Angela, and of course, that invitation, unclear who that came from, but Vladimir Putin will not participate. I got to say, I did get a message from a Ukrainian official saying a meeting with Trump is still possible. That is it for this special report. It was great to be with you as ever. Join us tomorrow in Europe Today at 8 a.m. in the morning, and we'll see you back here in Evian tomorrow at 7 p.m. Central European Time. Have a great night.